when anguish takes over the soul and everything that once seemed stable begins to collapse, it's natural for the heart to look upward, seeking help. In such moments, we raise our voices not out of strength, but out of desperation. We call on God, hoping to be heard, as if every word were a silent scream in the midst of chaos. The nights grow long, and sleep becomes an absent visitor. Pain does not sleep, and the mind insists on reliving everything that torments. Raising our hands at night is no longer a gesture of devotion, but a cry that finds no rest. There is a weariness that rest cannot cure, a restlessness that words cannot explain. In such moments, the soul refuses to be comforted, as if every consolation is too small in the face of such pain. And even when trying to remember God, the heart is even more troubled, for his silence seems to echo louder than any answer. Questions rise like waves, one after another. Has he forgotten me? Has his mercy come to an end? Where is the one who promised to be near the brokenhearted? And in this inner conflict, even words fail. The spirit grows quiet, not in peace, but in exhaustion. It is the soul standing before the abyss, asking if there is still hope. But it is precisely in that deafening silence, when all seems lost, that a spark is lit in the heart. Something inside us refuses to accept that this is the end of the story. And then, like opening an old dusty book, we begin to remember. Not the pain, but the times we were sustained. The nights when fear was overcome by a peace we couldn't explain. In that moment, the soul decides to shift its focus. Instead of looking at what is broken, it begins to remember what has already been restored. I remember the deeds of the Lord, the heart whispers. I meditate on the wonders he has performed. And this inward movement changes everything. The eyes that once saw only darkness now begin to spot traces of light on the path already traveled. Memory becomes a refuge. Every recollection of deliverance is a stone on the altar of hope. And as we look back, not with nostalgia, but with reverence, we realize that the same God who acted in the past is still here. Perhaps silent, but present. The soul finally finds a place to rest in the living memory of God's faithfulness. And in this place of remembrance and reverence, a new strength begins to emerge. Not a loud strength of someone trying to prove something to the world, but a quiet strength, born of trust in something greater than ourselves. The soul, once restless, finds rest. It realizes it doesn't need all the answers to move forward, just one certainty: God is still God. Even if the winds blow against us, even if the ground seems to give way, there is a rock that cannot be moved. And in meditating on these truths, the heart finds courage. We are no longer victims of our feelings, but guardians of a faith that has been tested and endured. Doubt may knock on the door, but it finds no dwelling place, because the memory of God's deeds has become a shield against despair. It's not about escaping reality. It's about facing it with eyes cleansed by the memory of divine faithfulness. And so, little by little, the soul that once groaned will begin to sing again, not because everything has changed, but because it has changed within. And that is the beginning of a new story. And when the soul sings again, even if only faintly, it is a sign of a miracle. Not the kind that makes headlines or impresses crowds, but a silent, intimate miracle that happens in the hidden place of the heart. It is the miracle of hope being reborn where there were only ashes, the miracle of believing again, even without guarantees. And this kind of miracle is too precious to ignore, because it doesn't depend on circumstances or immediate solutions. It is born from presence, from the certainty that we are not alone, even when everything feels empty. That's when faith takes on another name: perseverance. And those who persevere, even without seeing, even without feeling, are already winning the hardest battle, the one that happens within. It's not about strength, it's about surrender. It's not about understanding, it's about trusting. And in that place of trust, life begins to bloom again, like a field reborn after winter. The soul has not forgotten the pain, but now it knows there is something greater than the pain. The promise that God is writing something we cannot fully read yet. But we can already feel it. It is good. It is eternal. It is love. Sometimes all we need is to remember. Remember who God is. Remember what He has already done. Not because He needs to prove anything, but because we need to remember that He is the same. Yesterday, today, and forever. When everything in us wants to give up, the memory of God's faithfulness rescues us. It pulls us back from the abyss. It reminds us that pain is not the end of the story, that He has already opened seas, that He has made water spring from rock, that He has turned the cross into resurrection, and if He did it before, He can do it again. Not in the same way, not with the same signs, but with the same love, with the same intention, to save us, to renew us, to restore us. And this remembrance ignites a flame, small perhaps, but enough to keep us standing. Because when we remember who our God is, we begin to remember who we are in Him, and that changes everything. Faith does not cancel pain. It does not instantly turn tears into smiles. Faith does not prevent crisis, grief, fear, or doubt, but faith sustains. It is the ground that remains firm when everything else seems to crumble. It is what allows us to breathe amid chaos. It does not deny the valley, but guides us through it. And even if we cry, faith holds our hands. It reminds us that we are not alone, that even in silence, God is near, that even without answers, He is still God. To have faith is to trust even when the heart is in pieces. To take a step even when we cannot see the path. To say, I don't understand, but I believe. Because faith does not depend on circumstances, but on trust in who God is. Many times we forget that God never promised a life without problems, but a constant presence in the midst of them. The promise is not the absence of storms, but the assurance that He is with us in the storm. When we face difficulties, it's common to ask, why me? But the answer does not lie in the reason for suffering, but in how we respond to it. God calls us to trust, to hold firmly to His hand, even when everything in us wants to let go. He wants us to know that our worth does not depend on what we face, but on who He is to us. In the struggle, God is not distant. He is close, ready to lift us, strengthen us, and renew us. True strength is born from dependence on Him, not from our own efforts. Another important point to reflect on is this: the past should not be a prison for the present. Many people carry old wounds, traumas, and mistakes as if they were chains keeping them from moving forward. But the truth is that the past only has power over you if you allow it. God invites us to live in the present, to make the conscious decision not to let old wounds define who we are today. Freedom lies in choosing to forgive, to release what binds us, and to look at life with renewed hope. Remember, divine grace not only covers our mistakes, but empowers us to live anew with courage and faith. Tomorrow is a blank page that only you can write, and God wants to be your partner on this journey. Psalm 77 shows us that doubting is sometimes part of faith. The psalmist does not hide his anguish, his questions, his moments of crisis. And that is deeply liberating, because so often we think that having faith means never doubting, never questioning, never faltering. But that's not what we see in Scripture. True faith is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to keep going even when everything feels dark. It's in that place of honesty that God meets us, not when we pretend to be okay, but when we open our hearts and say, "Lord, I don't understand, but I'm here." That's when God's presence manifests most strongly. Don't be afraid of your questions. God is not offended by them. On the contrary, He walks with us as we seek answers. And finally, the psalmist invites us to remember what God has done. When the present feels too heavy, when the future is uncertain and the heart is burdened, looking back can be an act of faith. Remember the times God acted, when He made a way, when He sustained you, when you thought you couldn't go on. Remember what you've already been through and how much you've already overcome with His help. Memory becomes a shelter, a reminder that if God was faithful yesterday, He will be faithful today and tomorrow. The psalmist says, "I will remember the deeds of the Lord. I will recall your wonders of old." And this act of remembering turns despair into trust and doubt into hope. Sometimes all we need is to stop, breathe, and remember. God has saved me before, and He will do it again. Psalm 77 ends with a powerful shift. The psalmist, who began in despair, ends by contemplating the greatness of God. He didn't receive an immediate answer to his pain. No magical solution appeared, but something changed within him. He changed his perspective. He stopped looking at himself and started looking at God. He declared, "Your way, O God, is holy. What God is as great as our God." This inner transformation is often the miracle we need. When the suffering doesn't go away, when the pain persists, we can still find peace in contemplating who God is. Faith is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to trust even when everything screams the opposite. And that quiet, steady trust, full of memory and hope, is the seed of the victory that is yet to come. The psalmist reminds us of something crucial. Memory can be medicine for the soul. When we're at rock bottom, when the present seems dark and the future uncertain, the memory of God's deeds can be an anchor. "I remember the deeds of the Lord. I remember your miracles of long ago," says the psalmist. He chooses to deliberately remember what God has done, and that changes everything. He stops focusing on what was lost and begins to contemplate what was received. Gratitude begins to take root in his heart. Faith, once suffocated by pain, begins to breathe again. And that is a powerful lesson. When you don't know where to go, look back. Remember the times you thought you wouldn't make it, but did. Remember the doors that opened, the prayers that were answered, the moments when you felt peace in the midst of chaos. God has been with you before, and He has not changed. His faithfulness remains. So revive your memory. Bring to mind every small victory, every deliverance, every sign of love. Because when memory awakens faith, even pain bows to hope.